William Lane Craig has recently devoted an entire podcast to defending himself against our criticism of his stance on animal suffering. So we'd like to thank Dr. Craig for taking the time to respond, and in this video we offer our reply.
No one has said animals cannot suffer.
Well, what are the
so
issues
the question would be answered, yes, of course they suffer.
Let's examine this claim. In his debate and website articles, Dr. Craig uses only one source, Michael Murray's book, Nature Red in Tooth and Claw. Now, in this book, Murray argues that there are 4 variants on an argument that he calls neo-Cartesian, which may deflect the issue of animal suffering. Now, Craig's argument is that animals have pain, but don't know it because they don't have a prefrontal cortex. And in this book, this is argument neo-Cartesian defense number 4. So it's on page 56 of the book, and if you don't have the book, it's also in an essay that Murray acknowledged he reused in the book, and you can download that online for free. Look for page 14. Even if an animal has higher order access to a first order state of pain, it would lack any moral disvalue if the animal did not find the state to be undesirable. Such a mental state might bear some similarity to the conscious experience of persons with a damaged or absent prefrontal cortices. Individuals who have undergone a prefrontal lobotomy, for example, have reported an awareness of familiar pains, but paradoxically insisted that they no longer found the pain to be undesirable or unpleasant. They claim the pain feels the same, even though it no longer bothers them. As a result, creatures of this sort have first-order pain states and second-order awareness of them. But because they lack the capacity to regard those states as undesirable, such creatures do not suffer because of their pain. So Murray describes a case of an animal that has first and second-order pain awareness, but due to lack of a functioning prefrontal cortex, it does not suffer. And this is exactly what Dr. Craig describes. Dr. Craig describes 3 levels of pain awareness. Level 1.
There is simply the reaction to stimuli, such as an amoeba exhibits when you poke it with a needle. It doesn't really feel pain.
Note that he's labeling this level 1 pain awareness, yet it includes the statement,
it doesn't really feel pain.
So when he calls it a level of pain awareness, it's very clear that pain awareness does not necessarily mean that there's any pain or suffering going on. Now, level 3 counts as genuine suffering. We have no dispute there. So what we really need to investigate is what's being said about level 2. Now, Craig and Murray argue that an animal may feel level 2, but not level 3. And so they don't suffer from their pain because they are not aware of their pain. Now, we labeled this view neo-Cartesian, and Craig even challenged us on our label.
They call this view from Michael Murray neo-Cartesian. Is that what it is?
No, that again is a misrepresentation. Descartes' view was that animals are essentially machines who have no pain awareness of any sort, not even second-order pain awareness. Murray's view, or the view that he's examining, isn't neo-Cartesian at all.
It seems Dr. Craig doesn't know what the word neo means. Neo does not imply identical. Neo may mean a new or modified form of an old idea. Now, the chapter in Murray's book that questions the significance of animal suffering is called neo-Cartesianism. The same phrase is in the title of the essay that Murray acknowledges was reused in the book. You can read that for free online. And if you look at the index, the entire discussion of neuroscience and pain is contained within the chapter Neo-Cartesianism. Now, Murray says, central to neo-Cartesian explanations is the idea that non-human creatures, even if sentient, lack some human characteristic essential to conscious suffering.
And immediately you see in the title a misrepresentation of the position that Michael Murray is defending. No one has said animals cannot suffer.
Neo-Cartesian explanations of animal pain and suffering differ from other explanations I will defend in the book, since they deny rather than explain their reality. He goes on to say that C.S. Lewis is one of the most prominent defenders of one type of neo-Cartesian view. Now, Murray states, the central line of argument is that while animals are sentient creatures, and as such can be in states that can be fairly described as pain states, these animals cannot suffer because they lack something else which is a necessary condition for such pain to carry moral significance. It is in this sense that the view Lewis defends counts as neo-Cartesian. So the neo-Cartesian, according to Dr. Craig's primary source, does allow for animal sentience and does allow for pain states, but it still denies that animals suffer from that pain. Now let's recap what Dr. Craig said in his debate with Dr. Law. In it, he describes 3 levels of pain awareness, but really it's only level 3 that counts. Pay close attention in particular to how he concludes his argument.
That there is really a threefold hierarchy of pain awareness. On the most fundamental level, there is simply the reaction to stimuli, such as an amoeba exhibits when you poke it with a needle. It doesn't really feel pain. There's a second level of pain awareness, which sentient animals have, which is an experience of pain. And animals like horses, dogs, and cats would experience this second level pain awareness. But they do not experience a third level pain awareness, which is the awareness of second order pain. That is the awareness that one is himself in pain. For that sort of pain awareness requires self-awareness. And this is centered in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, a section of the brain that is missing in all animals except for the higher primates and human beings. And therefore, even though animals are in pain, they aren't aware of it. They don't have this third order pain awareness. They are not aware of pain, and therefore they do not suffer as human beings do. Now, this is a tremendous comfort to those of us who are animal lovers like myself, or to pet owners. Even though your dog or your cat may be in pain, it really isn't aware of being in pain, and therefore it doesn't suffer as you would when you are in pain.
They have pain awareness.
Or even though animals are in pain, they aren't aware of it.
They have pain awareness.
They aren't aware of it.
And in case that's not clear enough, let's quote another passage from Dr. Craig. He and Michael Murray describe a phenomenon called blind sight, where a person can respond to visual stimuli, but they have no conscious awareness that they can actually see. Here's the exact quote from Dr. Craig. Obviously, as Michael Murray says, it would be a pointless undertaking to invite a blind-sighted person to spend an afternoon at the art gallery. For even though he, in a sense, sees the paintings on the walls, he isn't aware that he sees them, and so he has no experience of the paintings. Now, neurobiology indicates a similar situation with respect to animal pain awareness. All animals but the great apes and man lack the neural pathways associated with level 3 pain awareness. Being a late evolutionary development, this pathway is not present throughout the animal world. What that implies is that throughout almost the entirety of the long history of evolutionary development, no creature was ever aware of being in pain. Viewed theologically, this discovery magnifies the mercy and goodness of God. God has shielded almost the entire animal kingdom throughout its history from an awareness of being in pain.
Yes, they suffer. They have pain awareness.
Why would God shield animals from terrible pain and suffering, but not higher primates? And if they do suffer, what happened to God's shield? Dr. Craig conveniently misquotes Lori Marino.
The question isn't whether animals have pain receptors. The question is whether or not there is this capacity to think about oneself as oneself.
Now, it's true that Dr. Marino did talk about pain receptors, but then she goes on to talk about metacognition.
So everyone's got brain systems that are intimately involved in detecting pain, and those systems are shared across all vertebrates. What this person seems to be talking about is some sort of thesis that if you don't have some sort of metacognition or self-awareness, You can't think about your own pain and therefore you're not in pain. But there's no evidence for that.
He also dismissed mirror self-recognition evidence as highly controversial. But this ignores the fact that when we asked Dr. Marino which tests exist for self-awareness, she didn't only use mirror test studies, and nor did we. We did not say they were definitive. We merely asked which tests exist and which animals had passed them. If Dr. Craig knows of a better test with greater scientific support that shows that animals, say dolphins, are not self-aware, then he should cite them. But he doesn't cite anything. If you look at the tests that have been done, you find evidence of self-awareness in non-primates. Moreover, it doesn't help Dr. Craig to say that the mirror test is controversial, because he claimed that animals aren't self-aware. He didn't say they might not be self-aware. He didn't say that the evidence for self-awareness was insufficient. He simply said they're not self-aware. So that means Dr. Craig needs the tests for self-awareness to all have null results. And that is just not the case.
The burden of proof doesn't lie with me.
The burden of proof is with Dr. Craig. He claimed that animals don't have self-awareness, so he needs to show it. To be fair to Michael Murray, he does give caveats, and he admits that such ideas might be wrong. But Dr. Craig claims these defenses as if they are facts. Of course, on his podcast, he backpedaled from saying they don't have self-awareness to they may not have self-awareness. Now, we would welcome a change of mind, but he's not declaring this as a change of mind. He's implying that we've misquoted him when we have not. He's flip-flopped his views. He claims that our discussion on fish pain is one-sided, when in fact we mentioned and showed a screenshot of the Jim Rose paper holding the opposite view. Now, Dr. Craig doesn't mention a single study showing that animals are self-aware or that they do experience pain and suffering, and yet he argues that our presentation is one-sided. Another claim made by Dr. Craig is that we simply ignored emails from the scientists that we contacted who supported Dr. Craig's point of view. That's not true. Not one single scientist who replied to our emails agreed with Dr. Craig. Now, if Dr. Craig has evidence otherwise, then he should present it. Perhaps he doesn't understand that he should provide sources for any claims he's making. Now, it's true, we are not neuroscientists. That's why we consulted the leading scientists in the field. We asked all of them to check over our film to be sure that it was free from errors and that we had not misquoted them. Who's checking over Dr. Craig's work? Now, another defense they use is that Murray's work is filled with footnotes and references to the scientific literature. Well, it's definitely filled with footnotes and references, but does it reference the relevant literature? That's the question. Take, for example, Marino and Rice's paper on dolphin mirror self-recognition. Is it mentioned by Murray? No. J.D. Smith's work on animal metacognition and uncertainty monitoring? No. What about Braithwaite and Snedden's or Nordgreen and Gardner's work on fish pain? No. There are a number of papers suggesting animals have self-awareness, and as far as we can see, none of them are referenced.
I do think that a scientifically informed philosopher is going to be more trustworthy on this issue than a philosophically naive neuroscientist.
I think this is an insult to all the scientists that we interviewed. Bruce Hood, for example, wrote a book about the interaction between philosophy and the neuroscience of the self. How is he philosophically naive? And Lori Marino delves deep into the issue of what the self means and how this ties up with neuroscience and neuroanatomy. Most importantly, Dr. Craig said this: "It almost seems as if some atheists would actually prefer that animals experience terrible suffering than have to give up the objection to theism based on the problem of animal pain. What's especially odd about this situation is that the question of animal suffering has nothing to do with theology. It's all about neuroscience." Well, Dr. Craig, if it's all about neuroscience, why don't you trust neuroscientists? Is it because they don't agree with you? Why was your only reference from your question of a week a theologian? Dr. Craig's co-host says this.
And by the way, nobody's ever said that only humans have this capacity. I mean, Murray himself points out that there are higher primates, that would have a developed prefrontal cortex and so on. The video did keep going to, is it true that only humans have this? Well, nobody ever said that only humans have it. So that's one thing.
I wonder if Craig and his co-host even watched our video. So, Anita, is it true that only primates have a prefrontal cortex?
Well, no, that's certainly not true. We know from the studies of neurophysiology and from the brain dissections of several rodent models that, in fact, both mice and rats have the prefrontal cortex.
About only humans possessing the frontal cortex, well, that's just ludicrous. I mean, we know other primates have frontal cortex because we do work on it. You know, so people like.
And what about non-primates, the rats and mice?
Yeah, of course they have. It's a degree of cortex, is presumably where the misconception is.
It really isn't true that primates are the only ones with a prefrontal cortex. All mammals have a cortex. All mammals have a neocortex.
Dr. Craig built his argument around the idea that non-higher primates don't have a prefrontal cortex. Now, his response in the podcast was, there's great controversy as to what constitutes a prefrontal cortex. I don't know how that even helps him, because he stated as a fact that certain animals don't have a prefrontal cortex. Now, if there's great controversy as to how to define a prefrontal cortex, how can Dr. Craig be so sure that they don't have one? Did he give even the slightest hint to his audience that what he was arguing might be controversial? No, he didn't. It's a perfect example of how Dr. Craig misleads his audience. Now, if you go on the Wikipedia page, there's mention of an old definition of the prefrontal cortex that excludes non-higher primates. This dates back to the 1930s, but it clearly states the projection zone definition of Fuster is the one that is widely accepted today, and this definition includes all mammals. Fuster's classic textbook has a staggering 4,724 citations on Google Scholar, which reveals its total dominance in the field. Not a single scientist that we interviewed mentioned any controversy as to the definition of the prefrontal cortex, and this included the author of the classic textbook on it. He simply stated that Craig was wrong. All mammals and some birds have the prefrontal cortex. But could this old definition from the 1930s save Dr. Craig? Even here, the answer is no. Dr. Craig is clear that it's only the great apes that have the level 3 awareness of pain. Yet the old 1930s definition includes all higher primates. Perhaps Dr. Craig would like a basic biology lesson. Great ape only includes a few species of living animals: humans, chimps, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans. But higher primates refers to a much larger group of animals, including new and old world monkeys. Moreover, Craig told us that his claim was based on recent discoveries in neuroscience. But a 1930s definition of the prefrontal cortex is not a recent discovery. The podcast also claims that the prefrontal cortex is less well developed in other animals than in humans. Now, that's something on which we agree, but that is not the claim that Dr. Craig previously made. The claim made was an unambiguous statement that certain animals don't have it, not that it's simply more developed in humans. Dr. Craig states that there's nothing homologous to the human great ape prefrontal cortex that can generate self-awareness. Now, we agree that the prefrontal cortex in humans is more developed than in other animals. But it's not proven that there's anything unique in the prefrontal cortex of humans that generates self-awareness. How does Dr. Craig explain the paper that we discussed that shows that self-awareness is preserved even when there is extensive damage to the prefrontal cortex? Does Dr. Craig cite any behavioral studies on animals? Not one single citation is given. This argument simply ignores all the studies that show evidence of self-awareness in, let's say, the dolphin, which has a very different neural architecture from apes. If we were so sure that there's nothing in the brains of dolphins that can generate self-awareness, why would scientists even bother studying it? At a recent meeting of the prestigious American Association for the Advancement of Science, scientists called for dolphins to be recognized as non-human persons. This followed the work not just of scientists, but also in particular a philosopher, Professor Tom White, who published a book arguing for dolphin personhood. Again, if Michael Murray reviewed the literature and properly addressed his critics, why was this ignored? It's one thing for Dr. Craig to argue a case against what White and the scientists of the American Association for Advancement of Science meeting are saying. Nothing wrong with that. But to imply to your audience that scientists have discovered that animals aren't aware of pain and ignore all this work or pretend it doesn't exist is perhaps irresponsible? Dr. Craig dismissed the paper by Smith on animal metacognition as saying that it only shows functional parallels to self-awareness. But behavioral scientists can only report on what appears to be the case, about whether animals can pass certain tests for self-awareness, which they do. Science can't give the certainty that Dr. Craig seems to have. Dr. Craig and his co-host also accuse us of ridiculing mind-body dualism. But we did no such thing. We simply argued that Dr. Craig's position was inconsistent with mind-body dualism. We made no comment as to whether mind-body dualism is valid or not. What about the Cambridge Declaration? Dr. Craig dismissed this as not being relevant because he said no one's disputing that animals have consciousness. But the Cambridge Declaration is far more powerful than that. The Declaration also says that the neural substrates of emotions do not appear to be confined to cortical structures. In fact, subcortical neural networks aroused during affective states in humans are also critically important for generating emotional behaviors in animals. Artificial arousal of the same brain regions generates corresponding behavior and feeling states in both humans and non-human animals. This is important because the issue at hand is whether animals have not only the physical sensation of pain, but the emotional reaction to it. And the Cambridge Declaration clearly talks about the presence of animal emotions. The Declaration doesn't simply state animals have consciousness, but talks of evidence of human-like levels of consciousness. Dr. Craig's argument relies on a sharp dividing line between human consciousness and animal consciousness. Now surely, if such a dividing line had been found, they would have mentioned it. I mean, this would be a major discovery. Let's go on the conference website and see how one of the sponsors of the event summed things up.
The way in which we have understood animal consciousness was very primitive and very backward. And everyone tonight said what they've always thought, but they've said it now and signed it in a declaration for the public and in front of the 60 Minutes camera, saying that animal consciousness and human consciousness are of such similarity that we have to ask ourselves how we treat animals and why we treat them the way that we do. It was historic. It was groundbreaking. Thank you for being here.
And also on the website, they link to an interview with one of the Declaration signatories, Philip Lowe of Stanford University and MIT. I think what he says is revealing.
We know that all mammals, all birds, and many other creatures like octopus have the nerve structures that produce consciousness. This means that these animals suffer. It's an inconvenient truth. It was always easy to say that animals have no consciousness. Now we have a group of respected neuroscientists who study the phenomena of consciousness, animal behavior, the neural network anatomy, and genetics of the brain. You can no longer say that we did not know.